and welcome to Mandobug Crafts, episode 76. What's up everybody? My name is Amanda, but you may know me on the internet as Mandobug. This is my channel where I share what I'm making with you guys. I'm coming to you from Buckley, Washington, where I'm from and live with my husband and 2 kids. And in this video I have some dyeing, knitting, crocheting, and kind of cross stitch. So starting the show out with something I've learned. This week I've learned quite a bit, so I have more than one thing. I usually try to keep it to one, but it didn't make sense to split it up. So I will start with the first thing, which is natural dyeing. So I've never used natural dyes before, and so this was a very huge learning experience for me. There were some successes and some failures, as with most things when you try them for the first time. So I read all of the instructions, but I didn't read them from beginning to end the night before. I started reading them, and it was saying if you're going to be using natural dyes, it's recommended that you soak whatever you're dyeing in a mordant overnight. So the mordant that I was using was, I believe, aluminum sulfate. So there are a couple different mordants that you can use, but the kit that I bought had aluminum sulfate in it. And so I read that you had to soak that, so that's what I did. I followed the process for mordanting my fibers and let it soak overnight. Basically, you fill up a pot, you use a certain percentage of mordant to whatever weight of fiber you're dyeing, and you bring it up to just before a boil and keep it at that temperature for at least, it was like 30 minutes to an hour, somewhere in there. And then you turn the heat off and you just let it soak. It said you could dye immediately after that, but some natural dyers prefer to soak overnight, if not over 2 nights. So I did that with my fabric and my yarn. But what I didn't continue to read was that for the different types of natural dyes, especially the ones that use kind of wood chips, you should also bring those up to right below boiling and kind of let the heat start exhausting the colors and the dyes out of them, and then let that soak overnight as well. And I didn't soak any of the roots or the walnut whole powder. I didn't soak those overnight. I just went ahead and heated them up and dyed with them right away. So I'm thinking that I would have gotten much richer colors had I soaked overnight like recommended, but you live and you learn. So the very first natural dye I dyed with was the walnut whole powder, and it produces anywhere from a nice beige to a brown. So I got a beige. I did 4 skeins of a 70% merino, 30% bamboo wool, and so they kind of got tangled, so I haven't hanged these up. They're not tangled, they're just messy, and I'm probably going to wind them by hand. So these hanks of yarn only had 1 tie in them, and I went ahead and tied an acrylic tie on each one just for easier handling, but I only did 1 tie, and I should have done more ties because they did just kind of get jumbled between the dyeing and the rinsing and the moving, and so next time I'm going to put more ties than just 1 in each hank, but I feel like this walnut whole powder just created such a beautiful color, and because this yarn is 30% bamboo, it didn't take the dye in all areas, so it just gives this lovely dimensional color to the yarn. And I knew that I was going to like a beigey or brown color for hopefully a garment, so I went ahead and dyed 4 skeins, which is obvious. This is a DK weight, so 4 skeins is not enough, but I'm thinking I may be able to stripe it with something in the future, and then that will be enough for a sweater. Then I also dyed some cotton. So this was undyed sugars and cream cotton, and I dyed this using Osage chips, which was another barky type natural material, and madder root, which was also a barky type. So the Osage chips, if that's how you say it, produced this yellowish goldish color, and the madder root produced this like, well, it's kind of like a yellowy orange. So the natural dye itself was like a dark red, almost orange. But because I didn't soak it overnight, and because this is cotton, it didn't take up as strongly, and so it's more of a soft yellow, orangish yellow than anything else. This I hand painted. I had some bottles that I put the dye in, and I just kind of squirted it onto the fiber and pushed it in, so you can see it's, you know, got a hand painted effect to it. I'm really excited to wind this up and see how it works up. And I was really happy to see that the natural dyes took to the cotton. It was all very experimental. Which, speaking of cotton, I had this Hobby Lobby cotton in stash, and it's got sparkle in it. And I dyed this with Saxon Blue, which was a liquid indigo dye, and it did not take at all. So this skein was in the same pot. Oh, little Jack. He's been kind of cranky this morning. He's out there with Josh and Emily, and he slept in really late. Like, it was 10:30, and I was just like, this is too late. Wake him up. And so ever since I woke him up, he's been really cranky, but I didn't want him to wake up late and then take a late nap and then be up all night. So we're dealing with the cranky. Anyways, this was in the same pot as this skein and this skein. Right. So, you know, honestly, there's one of two options here. Either this is not 98% cotton like the ball band said, or Hobby Lobby has treated the cotton with something that makes the yarn unsusceptible to natural dyes, because the sugar and cream cotton took the dye and the Hobby Lobby cotton did not. So I did follow the instructions for cotton. So it's recommended that you scour your wool, which most wool is already scoured. Unless you're processing it by hand, then obviously you scour it yourself. But the cotton, it said to scour differently than you would wool. It said to bring it up to, you know, simmering with soda ash or washing soda. And I didn't have any, but I read that you could make your own by baking baking soda. So I baked baking soda, and I used that to scour this before I soaked it in the mordant overnight and before I dyed it. Same with this cotton. I mean, the scouring should have removed anything that was on the cotton, but maybe there was something else. I'm not sure. So I found that to be really interesting. I mean, there is a slight, I'll bring it up close, but it will probably white balance to it. You know, that's what my camera likes to do. It's got a slight blue tint to it, but I think it's just slowly going to wash out over time. Because this, originally when it was in the pot, it was like a periwinkle blue, and then when I rinsed it, the dye just kept coming out and coming out and coming out. So that was a failure, but not something that I can really do anything about. I followed the instructions the best I could. So if you want to use natural dyes, don't dye Hobby Lobby's I Love This Cotton, because it's not going to take. I don't know about acid dyes, but natural dyes, it did not. Or at least this blend here with the sparkle in it. So then these two. This was a mini skein I had botched warping a self-striping yarn years ago. And it tangled and I lost a bunch of yarn, but I was able to keep this mini skein. So I threw it in the Saxon Blue dye pot, although years ago, before I knew better about tying hanks loosely, when you do put the ties on your hanks, they should be loose so that the dye can penetrate. I didn't inspect this hank when I got all my dye stuff together. And so I just threw it in the pot, not realizing it was tied too tight, so the dye didn't really penetrate. There's two spots where there were ties, so it will be really interesting to see how it knits up though, because it should have like these flashes of really light blue speckles. And then there is kind of a spot right here where it didn't take as much dye. But for the most part, this is like a really deep, almost black blue, and I just think it's really, really pretty. This was also in the same pot. This is, so I was dyeing with Lori, my mother-in-law, and this was her hand spun, which we didn't pre-soak overnight. We didn't mordant it and pre-soak it overnight. Although I did have mordant in the pot with the natural dyes, so that helped attach. So I didn't mention the mordant. It's kind of like with acid dyes, how acid is what helps bond the dye to the fiber. The mordant is what helps bond the dye to the fiber. So that was in the pot. It just didn't soak in it overnight. And we wanted to see, does it help the color take up better, which is what the what is claimed to happen. This is definitely a deeper, richer color, but they're also completely different yarns. This was a natural gray, this was a white. This is a 2-ply thicker hand spun, this is a 3-ply fingering weight yarn. So it's really hard to compare because it's apples to oranges, but I do feel like the soaking overnight gave it a deeper, richer, more consistent dye. And then the only other skein that I have is this one. It's another skein of the 70-30 Merino Bamboo blend, and this was dyed using that Saxon blue again. It was not in this dye pot. This was a hand paint, so it was a little more watered down version of the dye, and I also used lac and logwood, and so it was really fun to kind of do the hand painting. If I open it up, you'll see it's not gonna do, it shouldn't have any flashing or pooling because it's a very consistent dye. It's not patterned whatsoever. I just went crazy with the dye bottle. So that was a lot of fun doing the natural dyeing, and I'm really excited to do some more experimentation in the future. And then, because we were already dyeing, I wanted to try out the Shibori dyeing, which I kind of mentioned at the end of last week's podcast. So Shibori is a Japanese technique. It's kind of like a fancy tie-dyeing. You use rubber bands, rocks, you can stitch, you can use, I used PVC pole for one of the techniques, twine, there's some folding if you want, and it's supposed to create these really cool effects, but I didn't realize, so there's two things. So Saxon blue is the liquid version of indigo dye. It is not your true indigo dyeing. Indigo is a powder, and you have to combine it with, like a calcium and a fructose, and it's a vat, and it takes hours, and I didn't realize that. So we didn't attempt that because this was on Labor Day, and we had already spent most of our day doing the natural dyeing, and making lunch and things like that, watching kids. So, we didn't have time to do the true indigo vat, so we used the Saxon blue dye, which is a liquid-derived form of the indigo. It's not as strong and deep in color as the powder indigo. But also, I grabbed what I thought was cotton scraps in my craft room. Turns out it wasn't, because it didn't take the dye either. So I have all these scraps of fabric that pretty much nothing happened to. Some of them kind of look stained, and it was really disappointing because before the dye washed out, it looked like it was working. I have a ton of these. I did a ton of these. I mean, this one kind of worked. So this was a print that had some kind of, I don't know, some kind of man-made material on it. So the dye took to the background cloth and then resisted the dye where the polka dots were. I didn't do any Shibori technique to this. I just wanted to see if it would take the dye. And it did take a little bit of dye, so I'm guessing this was a blend. Because I scoured all of the fabric too, so anything that was in there should have been removed unless there's some chemical. But I'm mostly thinking this wasn't cotton. This was probably some synthetic. So this one kind of looks splotchy, like something kind of worked. And so just to make sure we weren't doing it wrong, my mother-in-law ran downstairs because she owns a quilting business, and she said, I know I have a 100% muslin cotton. So she went and grabbed a piece, did a quick a shibori on it and then dumped it in the pot. This was after we stopped dyeing, so the pot wasn't even hot anymore. Well, it was warm, but it wasn't simmering, and we didn't simmer it for the recommended 30 minutes. We didn't mordant this. There was mordant in the pot, but we didn't mordant it overnight, and it still took the dye better than everything that I mordanted and scoured, mordanted and pre-soaked. So I think I just had the wrong material, which is a bummer, but you know, now I know. Make sure it's 100% cotton to get the effect you want. But then also, this was the Saxon Blue, which was the derived liquid indigo, and it's just, you know, when you look up indigo dyed fabric, it's this deep, almost black blue to a lighter blue color range of colors, not this light powder blue. So I'm going to be doing this again with the real true powder indigo vat and 100% cotton. Just, you know, it's a learning experience. Wow, this is probably the longest intro I've ever had in my life. Sorry about that. So, I mean, I'm still not done with something I've learned. So Labor Day was the all-you-can-watch Craftsy event, which I mostly spent the day dyeing with Lori, but when I got home I had a couple hours in the evening, so I was looking around it, so I was like, I gotta watch something, and I stumbled upon Modern Irish Freeform Crochet, and I cannot speak highly enough of this class. It was a great class. I watched it from beginning to end, and I ended up purchasing it because it was that good, which was Craftsy's point, right? I mean, they got me. So I did make a couple motifs. Here's a little paisley. So this is just scrap fingering weight yarn, and that's why I think I'm going to be in love with this Shibori, the Freeform Irish Crochet, because you can just use fingering weight wool scraps to crochet these little motifs. Here's some leaves. I don't know if you can see that. And then what you do is you pin them down over a muslin or whatever you're trying to make in the shape that you want. You pin them down and you start crocheting mesh around attaching things in the shape that you want. And then when you're done, you can take out your pins, and it's not attached to the muslin, but you can lift up your piece and it's the shape of your muslin, because that's what you use to pin it out and crochet it together. And you can make garments, you can make jewelry, you can make collars. The possibilities are endless, so I'm really excited to be playing around with that. And I don't know what I'm going to make first. I'm just playing around with the ideas of these different little motifs. In the class, she teaches you how to read international charts, because this is really popular in Russia, and they have Russian magazines that are nothing but this modern Irish crochet, but their charts are a little different than your standard English crochet charts. So it was really cool to learn how to read the international charts, and I'm probably going to be ordering a Russian magazine in the near future. So I'm really excited to play around with that. So, moving on to finished objects, I have one finished object this week. It is the Antler Hat, and I did modify it just a bit, so I hope this isn't too blown out for you. This is Haiku Kensington, and it's a very, very soft oatmeal color, and so I made it in the child size for Emily because I was knitting it on a US 7, which I do not recommend. That is way too small of a needle for this yarn and this even what the pattern recommends, and it made it hard to knit the cables, especially the cable decreases. It was hard on my hands, and I was so happy to have this done because I was tired of how tight the knitting was. Luckily this hat isn't too dense. Emily has been wearing it, she loves it. So the original pattern has you knit for child, has you knit 6 of these repeats, and the idea is that you roll the brim up. And so that's why I saw how many repeats I had. I rolled the brim up and I was like, okay, subtract that many repeats from the hat to give a not rolled brim, because Emily doesn't like to have a rolled brim. She likes to have it. She puts her hats on like this and she pulls them down as far as she can. So if it had a rolled brim, she'd be really frustrated that the hat was too long. So I just did the 3 repeats and then started the decreases, and the hat fits and she loves it. And then I did also make a removable pom-pom. So I had some Knit Picks palette and stash. I made a fat pom-pom using a pom-pom maker, and then when I tied it together, I tied it using some cotton, just because I felt like the cotton was going to hold up better over time than a wool string would. I guess I could have used a nylon blend and it would have been fine, but I went ahead with the heavily plied cotton yarn. So I can tie and remove this pom-pom at any point, which is great for washing, or if Emily decides she wants a pom-pom today or doesn't. So that's my finished object. This is a free pattern. So moving on to works in progress, I've really only been making progress on my Vegas top. So I have my purple, my pink, my blue, a gold, and a green. So I think these are all the colors I'm going to use. And I think I'm going to repeat the colors on the front and the back, just because I think I'm going to need so many different colors. If I was going to do one triangle in each color, it's just too many colors. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep to these 5. That is 5, right? Yeah, I'm just going to keep to these 5 colors and match the front to the back. And I still haven't done the math to figure out how many I need for each size. So for now, I'm just going to do 2 of each of these colors, and then I'll sit down and do the math and start figuring all that out. I'm using this Vegas yarn by Skacel, which is a rayon polyester blend, fingering weight, super sparkly, comes in these cones. So I'm crocheting this using a 2.5mm hook, and this is my design that will eventually be a tank top. Slowly but surely. Watch, I'm going to finish it in the middle of winter, which is going to be so strange to be making a tank top when it's possibly snowing outside. So moving on to current events. So I am knitting along with the Maker's Mercantile knit along, which is for the Lorelai Shawl, which is a pay-for pattern on Ravelry. Let's see here. Like, where's the top? It's the swoopy one, guys. There we go. That's the way that it goes. So I have started in Schmutzarella yarns in her Cheese Balls colorway, and knit. It's just garter stitch for a while. I think I have just a few more repeats of the pattern before I get to the mosaic section, which I will be switching to these 2 colors. This is Edith, leftover from my vintage Prem hat, and this is just white fine height. So the mosaic will be in these 2, just because I was worried that the variegated speckled cheese balls would not give me enough contrast between these 2. So I'm going to cut it out and just use the white instead. So it's been a pretty pleasurable knit, with the only exception being that the repeat is 6 rows, and normally with a 6-row repeat I have it memorized after 2 to 3 repeats, but this one, kid you not, took me over 20 repeats to memorize, and it's really not even that difficult. You're only, well, that's not true. You're not only increasing on one side, but you are, it does have a slip stitch edge. So keeping track of when you're slipping, when you're increasing can be a bit tricky, because this is not a standard shawl shape. So that was a bit tricky for me, but I've just been keeping notes. I have a paper with tally marks. So I have managed that way to keep track of what row I'm on and where to go. I don't normally have to do that with patterns, but for this one I have. So if you do it, I do recommend you keep notes, because it is really easy to get off. I know there have been some other people participating who have gotten off, and if you mess up your increases, it obviously messes up the shape. So instead of a swoopy shape, some people have had like swoop straight. It is really easy to get thrown off. And then also for current events, I am hosting the Halloween Make-Along. So that started September 1st and will run through October 31st. So this is a make-along where you pretty much make anything you want from September 1st to October 31st, as long as it's Halloween themed and finished by Halloween. You'll get an entry for a prize drawing, which I have not gathered the prizes yet, so stay tuned for that. But it's 2 months away, so there's still plenty of time to plan and get something made. I am going to be picking up my Wacky Witches in Stitches again. So I have been working on this cross stitch for I think 2 years now. It was a sampler mystery stitch along either 2 or 3 years ago. And so it's been fully released and I've just been, you know, making my progress on it. I'm currently on this spot right here with a tree and there's a zombie that's going to be coming out of the ground. I believe there's an owl in the tree and some clouds. So I'm just going to continue stitching along. And I don't remember if I mentioned this pattern is by Clouds Factory. And that cute little needle minder was from the Frosted Pumpkin Stitchery. They did a limited edition run with another company, I think. They partnered with them to make these. That might not be true. I'm not sure. It was one of those things where I saw it on Instagram and had to have it. You know how that goes, right? But speaking of Halloween stitching, check it out. Have you seen the Halloween sampler that is about to be released? It comes out September 15th, it looks like. It will be rolling out in shops. It is called the Halloween at Hawk Run Hollow. So I had never seen this before, but apparently the designers behind this design are doing a year of stitches at this Hawk Run Hollow, and this is the Halloween rendition, and it is so cute. I need it. I need it. I need it. I mean, I can't really justify it because I'm still working on this one from years ago. Cross stitch is just, it's a very slow craft, which is one of the reasons why I put it down for so long, because it's so slow I start losing interest and I want something quicker. And I thought knitting was slow. Cross stitch is slow. But it is gorgeous, and when you get your cross stitch framed and hung, it lasts forever. So it's worth it. It's time consuming, but I need this design because I do. Even if it takes me 10 years to finish this one, this Halloween at Hawk Run Hollow is what's going to be stitched next, hands down. So check it out. And then moving on to Let's Chat. I don't want this to take up too much time because I don't want my video to be too long. But 2 videos ago, the one where I did the giveaway, which, speaking of the giveaway, I still haven't heard back from Crafty Mystic yet. So if you haven't heard, you won the giveaway for my Podiversary. So contact me either on Ravelry or mandobugcrafts@gmail.com. And if I don't hear from her by next podcast, I'll go ahead and do another drawing. So yes, but Rose had asked which hand knits I get the most use out of. So I did want to go ahead and share that. I was living in Georgia when I learned to knit, and it wasn't cold there very often, so when I did wear knits, it was usually small shawls or cowls. But now that I'm back up in Washington, I'm feeling the sweaters. I do still wear cowls and shawls, and because I have so many, they all get about equal wear. But this sweater has gotten the most wear out of anything. And this is Japan Sleeves by Hohi Locatelli. And I think there's a few reasons it gets the most wear. It's fingering weight. So it is a multi-season garment. It's light enough to start wearing in the early fall and early fall and early spring. So, you know, it can span through fall, winter, and spring. Sometimes even late spring, depending. It has these really cute lace panels on the sleeves. And so that's reason number 1. Reason number 2, it's they're my colors, they're very matching to my wardrobe. And then another reason is that I knit this using a merino cashmere blend. So this is Dream in Color Smushy with Cashmere, and you just want it to touch you all the time. I'm like, not kidding you. So I'm very glad that I splurged on the yarn and I treated myself for this one, because it's one of my favorite knits. It's one of the garments that fits me the best, and I wear it the most. So this is my most used hand knit. And then I also thought it would be interesting to talk about my least used hand knit. And I think I've shared this on the podcast before, definitely back when I made it. So this cowl I knit using one of my very first hand spuns from my wheel. So my wheel came with some very scratchy wool, and I spun it into a chunky 2-ply, it looks like, and then I hand dyed it for the first time using Kool-Aid, my very first time dyeing. So first wheel spun, first hand dyed, and I knit it into this cowl, which I love the way that it turned out. I love the way that it looks, and if it wasn't so scratchy, I would wear it more. But this is so scratchy. This is not anything you want near your face. It was a rookie mistake to turn it into a cowl. I'm thinking if I lined it with something soft, even maybe something that came out over the front, that it could be wearable and usable. But in its current state, it is not wearable or usable, which is a shame because it is beautiful. It's just, I never wear this. I don't plan on wearing it, like I said, unless I fixed it. So, least used. But it's a lot of firsts for me. I can't get rid of it. So I really do. I should try lining it and see if that fixes that problem for me. Oh, I did want to share. So I'm trying to write down notes throughout my week about what happens during my week, because I get here in front of the camera and I'm like, I didn't do anything, which is not true. I just don't remember all of the little things that are worth sharing. This one I felt like was worth sharing because it was funny. So Emily is now tall enough to open doors, and she opened the bathroom door one morning and got into my makeup. I wish I took a picture. I did not, but this is my Too Faced Natural Matte Palette, and if I get up nice and close, you can see little girl fingernails all up in my makeup. Luckily, she didn't bust any of them. They're still usable. She didn't hurt anything, but she did have like brown all over her face. And she came to me and she goes, "Look, Mommy, I'm so pretty." I was like, "Emily, come here." And I picked her up and I showed her in the mirror what she did to her face. And she goes, "Oh no, what happened?" I'm like, "Emily." And so I helped her wash it off. When I wear makeup and she sees me putting it on, she often will come say, "Oh, can I have pink?" And I'll let her have a little pink on her eyes. So, not the brown all over her face. So I need to be better about keeping my things up, and when things get quiet, keeping an eye on where she is and what she's doing, because we're definitely at that age now. And then, let's see, my bucha, I have bucha, and I bought a new vessel, and I have new jars on the way, so I will be starting a second brew, so I won't be running out. Josh is only drinking one this week, that's why I still have bucha. This week we did, so one of my very good friends went down to Oregon and picked some peaches right out of the tree, brought them home, gave me a bunch. They were so juicy and amazing. I chopped up a bunch and froze them, and so I made a peach puree, and I split half of the puree and put ginger in one half and left the other plain, and then I split my brew up into that. There was so much peach that I ended up with 3 tablespoons in each jar again. but interestingly enough, the plain peach flavor doesn't really come through, and it tastes more like an unflavored kombucha, but the peach ginger is really good. And I have to say, and I know I say this every week, I feel like, this is the best brew I've ever made. I think it really comes down to the fact that my SCOBY is getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and so I'm getting a much stronger flavor, and I'm learning when to pull my brew at the right time to get the flavors that I want. So that's been fun. I'm really excited that it's still going well. And then, so other than that, this Sunday, there is a natural dyeing skills exchange that's going to be happening at a farm where my mother-in-law got one of her sheep from. So her and I are going to be going there, and I think we're taking Emily, and so we're going to be learning some more about natural dyeing. So I'm really excited about that, and I look forward to sharing what I learned with you guys. Other than that, this is longer than I like to make my podcast, so I gotta go. I will chat with you guys next week. Until then, happy crafting. Bye!